This is Jennifer Clark Tinker. The sermon you're about to hear is based on Matthew chapter 2. I gave this sermon at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Shelby, Texas on Sunday, December 29th, 2013. The story deals with the dark side of the Christmas story, some events surrounding Jesus' birth that are hard to hear, hard to talk about. But in this message, we deal with the question, whose side is God on when a power-hungry ruler gets out of control? So here's the message, Bethlehem and the least of these. Bah humbug. This is the infamous retort of Ebenezer Scrooge in Charles Dickens' classic story, The Christmas Carol. Scrooge, for those who don't know, is the main character in The Christmas Carol. He has become an old man, jaded by the world, and is more concerned about himself and his own wealth than anyone else. In the beginning of the story, Christmas to him is a waste, a frivolous affair, and he wants no part of it. When others celebrate and wish Scrooge a Merry Christmas, he tries to shut them down by saying, "Bah, humbug." It seems that Matthew is trying to pull a Scrooge on us with our gospel text for the morning. He doesn't seem to want to let us linger long on the merrymaking and pageant-worthy events surrounding Jesus' birth. The baby is born, the shepherds visit, the wise men come, then suddenly a big humbug falls over the story. Jesus and his family are on the run, fleeing to Egypt to escape the death threat of a tyrant. Backing up a little to earlier in Matthew chapter 2, we see in verse 2 that the whole story of the wise men is tangled up with this awful King Herod. Let me tell you, this King Herod, he makes Scrooge look like a saint. Herod was a brutal man who ruthlessly protected his position. The wise men asked King Herod about a child who had been born king of the Jews. Then in verses 3 to 4, the idea that someone else might claim the role of king caused King Herod great fear. And he pressed the wise men for more details about the child's age and location. He got them to narrow the location down to Bethlehem. Then in verse 8, he orders the wise men to go and search diligently for the child and report the child's location to him. He told them he wanted to also go and pay him homage. But as we see in the opening of our gospel text for today, in Matthew 2, verse 13, his intent was actually to destroy the child. What comes next is a good news of sorts, but it's also followed by absolute horror. The good news comes in verses 13 through 15. Joseph had another one of his angels appearing in a dream, revelations, that warned him that Jesus was in danger. So, Joseph, being the good father he was, got up in the middle of the night and immediately got Jesus and Mary out of there. The angel told him to take them to Egypt and to wait there until the angel told them otherwise. So we can breathe a sigh of relief because Jesus is safe, right? Well, not exactly. I mean, Jesus is safe, for now, anyway. But when the wise men do not follow through on their job to report back to King Herod, Herod totally loses it, as we see in verse 16. Now, being no closer to discovering the identity of the child king he intended to destroy, he decides to destroy all the male children in and around Bethlehem. Herod's solution is a severe and horrific method of trying to get the result he wants. The fact that he fails at getting Jesus in particular does not lessen the horror of all the other children that were slain. And the idea that all of those children died specifically in an attempt to get to Jesus throws a bit of a cloud over Jesus' arrival. But why? Why can't we just revel in the good news of our Savior's birth? Why can't we just stick with the glad tidings and great joy stuff? Why does Matthew have to sully the nativity with this slaughter? Why does Matthew put this big humbug on our Christmas story? One surface explanation as to why Matthew includes the story in this gospel is, as he notes, to fulfill prophecy. In fact, Matthew notes 3 different prophecies that are being fulfilled with this story. Another layer of explanation may be that Matthew wanted to draw a parallel between Jesus and Moses. If you'll recall, Moses' young life was also threatened by a power-hungry ruler. But I think there is even more at work here. In this story, Matthew illustrates just how broken the world is. And really, he's not telling us anything we don't already know. Certainly, the original hearers of Matthew's gospel were no strangers to tyrants and dictators and oppression. Even we modern hearers in our world today are painfully aware of holocausts and killing sprees. That Matthew tells this story like it was gives us a greater view into just where God is when power is abused and innocents suffer. Our God is on the side of the oppressed, not on the side of the tyrant. Matthew is not trying to put a humbug on our celebration, but to illustrate for us just how far God is willing to go to challenge the oppression of this world. Now I want to go back to Scrooge for a moment. Throughout the story of the Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge is made aware of his own oppressive ways. He is taken through Christmases past, present, and seen into the future to see just the kind of man he has become or will become if he continues on the path he's chosen. When Scrooge is taken to a particular Christmas of his past, he sees his old boss from his years as an apprentice, years and years ago. He looks on as his boss, old Fezziwig, throws an office Christmas party. Scrooge recognizes this party as an act of generosity on the part of Fezziwig. Scrooge marvels aloud that Fezziwig, as the one in charge, has the power. He says he has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. He then reflects on his own mistreatment of the clerk that he employs. Power, wealth, privilege, all of these can be used for great good or for terrible destruction. They can be used to make the plight of others light or burdensome. Clearly, Herod chose rather blatantly to use his power to burden his people, causing suffering and mourning and lamentation just to try to stay on top. By contrast, our God, who has ultimate power, uses his power to make himself vulnerable in the form of a baby whose very life is threatened from day one. God comes among us as one who is fleeing from an oppressive ruler, not as one who is burdening us with oppression and pain. This is a pretty consistent message in Matthew's gospel. Later in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 25, verses 31 and following, Jesus teaches that when he comes back, he will separate the people, and to those on his right he will bless, saying, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. When those at his right hand puzzle over his words because they don't recall doing these things for him, he explains, just as you did to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. Likewise, when innocents suffer at the hands of a tyrant, God feels it as if it is also done to him. And even though Jesus narrowly escaped Herod's death threat, Jesus did not make it out of this human experience without eventually meeting a similar fate to those innocents slain. He did not rise up as a tyrannical king to lord his power over the people. Instead, he went the way of death on the cross, assuming the full burden of the weight of our sin. He then rose again and won victory over death, suffering, tyranny, and pain. Through his example and through his dying and rising, he ushered in a new kingdom where the last shall be first and the first shall be last. The tyrants and oppressors are subverted, and the least of these and innocents are honored. This God, who has the power to make our lives light or burdensome, chooses love and self-sacrifice for our sakes. What is, in fact, a terrible story that Matthew tells of these innocent babies slain is not for the purpose of squashing our merrymaking, but to show us a deeper truth. Beyond the elation of Christmas is the good news of a God who stands with us in the very worst of times. May we feel his presence as we face the burdens of this life. And may we be empowered by his Spirit to live his example of love.